Kitco News special coverage of the Rule Symposium, Natural Resource Investing, is brought to you by G Mining Ventures.
Hey everyone, I'm Jeremy Saffron. Welcome back to Kitco News. On location at the Rule Symposium 2025 here in Florida. Now, uranium prices are pulling back after a brief surge sparked by Sprott's $200 million buying spree, but markets aren't that thin here. And at the same time, Washington is considering a sanctions bill that would slap a 500% tariff on imports from countries that buy Russian uranium, oil, or gas. Now, that's directly targeting China and India. The bill has bipartisan traction, but President Trump hasn't formally endorsed it in the White House. Now, meanwhile, Japan talking about restarting nuclear reactors shut down since Fukushima, aiming to double their nuclear power to 20% of its grid by 2040. And we got to talk about SMRs. These small modular reactors are at the center of a global capital race in the U.S., ramping up support to compete with China and Russia. And I guess we should also mention this whole news that came out with rare earths today with the Department of Defense and a company called MP Minerals. Of course, we're going to get into that. Let's welcome my guest, Scott Melbye. He's the Executive Vice President of Uranium Energy Corp, also President of the Uranium Producers of America. You're going into fourth term almost.
Yeah, hopefully next week at our board meeting in Washington, D.C. Right. So yeah, Jeremy, thanks for having me. You've just touched on just a small number of the incredibly positive catalysts that are happening in the space today. Whether it's the growth of nuclear power, the bipartisan acceptance, uranium is a critical mineral. We've never seen a better investment thesis for uranium or nuclear energy than we see today.
Yeah, certainly a lot of people talking about rare earths as we've seen this stock action. I want to get you on the price action with uranium because obviously it's down a little bit. Sprott had that trigger to jump, 200 million in the market. Talk to me a little bit about what that meant and what does the Uranium Trust help or kind of distort?
No, listen, the raise that Sprott did 3 weeks ago to produced $200 million in their bank to go out and purchase uranium. Very constructive for strengthening prices. Was I a bit disappointed? It didn't see more of a price increase, but when they're done, they will have cleared off 2 million pounds from the market that won't be there for the next buyers that come to market. And I think the traders see Sprott coming and front run it a bit, but I don't think we're looking at a big overhang of market. I think the trader churn kind of got the front runners that flipped it back into Sprott. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the big demand is coming from utilities and they're purchasing of both long-term contract supplies and spot supplies that really will kick in here in the late summer going into September in the World Nuclear Association. So we see it as incredibly constructive. Listen, prices were, languishing in the low 60s. Now have traded as high as 78, 50 or so in the last week. So we're encouraged. Spot price can move on small things, but the fundamentals really speak to higher prices through the course of the year.
Yeah, speaking of fundamentals, Scott, it's quite crazy to kind of look at some of these numbers. Kazatomprom, did I say that right?
Kazatomprom.
There we go. Kazatomprom. They now say that 2025 output will fall 20% below guidance. And then we got this French miner Orano, they just shut down their Niger plant.
Yeah.
So is the West dangerously over-reliant on safe supply uranium? Producers unstable?
Yeah, that's one of the drivers are the green energy transition, the need for more power. Geopolitics, are playing a huge impact in our market because we presently in the United States, we get 20% of our electricity from nuclear power. 50% of the uranium for that's coming from places like Russia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. And the geopolitics have extended even to Niger, where the French have basically been kicked out of there, and that impacts French supplies of uranium, which causes Urano to have to look to places like Canada and be more aggressive there. So the bottom line message is the global market, if there was perfect mobility of uranium, no sanctions or restrictions, we're in a 50 million pound deficit in a 200 million pound market over the next year and a half. 1.7 billion pound deficit over the next 15 years. So for miners and developers in places like Canada and the United States, the message is get going, get moving, and bring new mines into production. Unfortunately, we missed a whole investment cycle in that bear market after Fukushima. So the production will come, but it's kind of remarkable how little production is in the wings and coming on. But companies like UEC are obviously doing their part to bring on production in Texas, Wyoming, and ultimately in Saskatchewan. Yeah. So it's incredibly bullish, but I think we have to realize we're in a supply squeeze in a market where demand is doubling by 2045 and mines aren't growing at the same pace.
Interesting. Saskatchewan, big shout out. I mean, I'm from there originally. Yeah. I have to always say hi to Saskatchewan. But potash too. I mean, we got to talk about the geopolitical situation because you mentioned that we have this 50 million that we don't have right now. And Senate Republicans led by Lindsey Graham are really talking. I mean, it's making the headlines. They're pushing for this new sanctions bill that includes Russian uranium, slap 500% tariff on buyers like China and India. Trump hasn't backed it, but I guess what will that mean for the sector?
Well, it's quite interesting because, I mean, obviously we were big proponents of the Russian uranium ban. It came 2.5 years after the second invasion of Ukraine. It indicates how reliant the U.S. utilities were on Russian uranium. But the ban is in place. It was unanimously passed by Congress, bipartisan support, but it did have waivers through 2027. And what Lindsey Graham is proposing is that the waivers would be stopped immediately, and any countries that are buying oil, gas, or uranium from Russia be slapped with that tariff. It has 82 co-sponsors in a 100-seat Senate. That's co-sponsors, not just support. They want their name on the bill. So it gives you an indication of how much strong support there is to keep Russia out of our business and punish them for failing to step up and negotiate with Ukraine. One of the things as the head of the Uranium Producers of America that I'll be lobbying next week in Washington on is we also want to see that ban extended to China. As I'll tell you what we saw when the Russian ban came into effect, we saw an unusual spike in Russian sales to China and a spike in Chinese sales to the United States. It's the shell game that is played in oil sanctions against Iran, using a third country to move material around a ban or a sanction, and nobody thinks that's a good idea on the Hill. Republicans, Democrats are united. So, we'd like to see not only a Russia ban extended, but extended to go to China as well.
Interesting. I'm curious, because China obviously controls about 90% of that refining capacity for nuclear fuel, and of course for these rare earths. Can tariffs fix that, or is it just going to raise the costs in the meantime?
Well, listen, we were independent of Chinese and Russian supplies before the breakup of the Soviet Union. We have the resources in the West. We have the technologies. So it's just the will to do it. And I think that MP Minerals announcement you referenced is a good example of where, we're reliant on those rare earth minerals for magnets that go into some of our most important weapon systems. Uranium is also a critical mineral in Trump's mind. And so I'm very excited to go to Washington for the next 2 weeks to really talk to the White House and the Energy Dominance Council and the Defense Department to say, hey, President Trump issued an executive order to revitalize the uranium conversion and enrichment industry in the United States and give me a report on my desk by 120 days. So Uranium Energy Corp and the Uranium Producers of America are back in Washington to say, hey, we're here. Here's what we're doing. What more could we be doing to support this American energy dominance agenda? And I'm very excited, and I think this announcement today should spill over into uranium.
Talk to me a little bit about this announcement. For those at home, I was just getting the news before coming to air. It seems like MP Minerals, the stock's up about 50%. The Department of Defense has decided to almost create a sovereign fund for these rare earths. Is that what I'm understanding?
That's exactly what it is. It's government direct investment in critical minerals and critical minerals processing. That's...
to speed up the process.
Absolutely. And, President Trump, whether it's the nuclear executive orders or the executive orders on critical minerals, if you want more energy, you want more critical minerals, uranium, oil and gas, these are the kind of things that you do to really unlock, American capabilities. Because we do, in many cases, have the capabilities. We just outsourced it to China and Russia.
Yeah. I wonder how, quick this will kind of move. Obviously, we know Trump's already invoked that Defense Production Act when it comes to rare earths. How far behind is America within uranium in the sector?
Well, listen, we led global production in 1980, and we ceded that leadership to Canada, basically the rise of Saskatchewan production. But then in recent years, it's been Kazakhstan that's taken the top spot in global production. Why is that dangerous for us. They share borders with Russia and China. Russia's in the penalty box globally with sanctions. They have huge demand for uranium for their domestic reactors and their reactors that they have in Turkey, Belarus, Egypt, China, India. So in a way, Kazakhstan is perhaps more strategically important from a resource perspective than Ukraine. And they've really consolidated half the ownership of the mines in Kazakhstan. China, over the last 5-10 years, has been increasing their control over the other half. Today, 80% of the uranium from Kazakhstan goes to those two countries. It's not coming to the Europe, UK, or American markets. So we have to realize that the world's largest producer is not for us. It's in the BRICS camp, and that's the reality. But the good news is the United States, Canada, Australia have huge resources of uranium that are underutilized. We just haven't made the investment. In the US, 6 uranium companies have restarted production. UEC has really been the leader in this regard. We're now the largest US producer by market cap, by licensed production, 12 million pounds, and by resources, 500 million in North America. 300 million of the resources that we have are within 50 to 100 miles of these 3 processing centers in Texas and Wyoming. These aren't just pounds in the ground. They're pounds in the ground with a pathway to be turned to cash through our processing capabilities.
You know, and then yet you look, I mean, it's obviously cyclical, our commodity sector, but within the rare earths, I mean, you know, the stock can still kind of be down. So is jurisdictional risk underpriced? Is it overpriced? What are your thoughts?
Listen, uranium equities had a tough start to the year. We had 2 false narratives. There was the DeepSeek story that kind of led to the notion that, the hyperscalers are not going to have to build data centers. They're not going to need the energy infrastructure, which was really favoring nuclear and gas. That was a false story. I mean, we've shown that the hyperscalers are investing. I think I saw a Goldman Sachs figure that over the last 7 years, electricity demand from data centers has increased greater than 25% for the last 7 years. That's before the big AI push. This is very real. It's not stopping, and they're all investing in nuclear power. But it knocked the equities back. There was also a story that, Putin is going to find, Jesus and apologize to Ukraine, and we're going to buy uranium from Russia again. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody thinks that's a good idea. Another false story. And then obviously Liberation Day knocked all the stocks back. Everyone was at 52-week lows, but you've seen now since April, uranium equities have rallied between 30 and in Cameco's percent, 100%. So I think we're back on that realization that the fundamentals for nuclear energy and uranium have never been better for investors here at Sprott or the Rule Symposium. They took that as a buying opportunity, and that was the smart move to buy in those dips. It wasn't reflective of our industry or our companies. So
a big runway to go too. I mean, you've heard about it. Obviously, SMRs are often touted kind of the future. I mean, they're scalable. They're kind of easier. They're modular, obviously. But there's not really any online. So is there any fundamentals to look at? Is there any economics?
This is what's huge. I think maybe even 6 months to a year ago, we were looking at the big push and growth in SMRs being 2030 on, but with the understanding that the first of a kind units in places like Texas, Wyoming, Natrium Reactor, TerraPower, X Energy, NuScale in Romania, these were going to be built in the 28, 29, 30 timeframe as the demonstration projects supported by the US government, Canadian government, GE Hitachi in Darlington, Canada. They're already under construction. Now what Trump has done with the executive orders, he's saying, I want SMRs licensed in less than 6 months. Wow. And that not only speeds the timeline to actual operation, but it unlocks private and public capital. Trump's not going to, this isn't something that has to be funded by the taxpayer, but when you cap that unknown liability of permitting and licensing to 18 months, billions will flow in and are flowing in from global banks, private equity, and even the hyperscalers, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, are willing to invest in these SMR facilities. So we also have President Trump saying, if you think you can build these SMR reactors faster on federal land or alongside defense facilities, and we can co-site AI data centers with our military base in the U.S., he's making that available as a process. He's leveraging Idaho National Labs, a national treasure, on our laboratory system in the DOE to build these under the dome at INL to speed the development. So I think in the last 6 months, the reality of SMRs has just shifted. The timeline shifted sooner for those first-of-a-kind units. And then in 2030 on, I think it revolutionizes the way electricity is generated and distributed, whether it's desalination of water, hydrogen production, data centers, or just baseload demand for small and large markets. It will change, like the gas turbine changed things in the past.
It's a fascinating industry. I mean, we were talking about your history, obviously president of the Uranium Producers of America. 4 decades you've been involved in this. Have you ever seen such tailwinds on the industry side?
I haven't, and it's really those 4 things. It's the green energy transition, which really was a realization on the political left that nuclear is a good thing, something to be supported, not opposed. And you say, well, in the Trump administration, climate change, carbon emissions is not a big a deal, but to a lot of people around the world, clean energy still is. Nuclear ticks that box. If you're a conservative, you're a Republican, you're on the right, you like nuclear because it's part of that energy dominance, abundant, resilient power. Just the growth in electricity demand. We haven't seen, the nuclear story, the nuclear growth story over the last 20 years has been the emerging markets, China, India. Now it's the developed world. We have to build generating capacity in North America for the first time since the early 2000s. Nuclear plays into that. And then geopolitics we talked about, and then just the supply and demand fundamentals. We don't have enough uranium mines that have been, this isn't like base and precious metals where you have a lot more frequent swings in prices and there's inflow and outflow of investment in new mines. Our low-hanging fruit, mines in the US are already moving into production. Restarts, one in Africa and one in Australia. That's the low-hanging fruit. We now need greenfield mines moving forward, and there just aren't enough of those in the works. They will be incentivized and they will be built, but this is a 5-6 year bull market story because it will take that long to get the industry back to where it needs to be.
Speaking of that little runway that you're talking about on the long-term growth, you did mention that the utilities are seeing those long-term contracts signed again. And we know, Rick Rule, I've been talking to him, he said this week that uranium miners are still pretty under-owned. It's an interesting one because where's the smart money going? Is it developers, juniors? Is it physical on this side?
Yeah, it's interesting. You can invest in the physical uranium through Sprott Physical Uranium Trust. You can invest in the equities like UEC, which is you're really investing in that company's ability to bring on mines. In our case, Texas, Wyoming, Saskatchewan. There's the ETFs, and then you have the royalty model. Uranium royalties, kind of elements of all of those. But I think what you saw. Speaking, this is a retail conference, but speaking to a lot of institutional investors, when uranium equities dipped at the beginning of the year, they sold off. Yeah. And they don't sit around and wait, but they very much love the nuclear story. They love uranium. And what's rallied the fastest, the furthest in this current rally is Cameco. They get into the large caps first, and then they move down the market cap ladder. And so I think, next up are the companies like NextGen and UEC that, will begin. And, we're certainly rallying in this. So I think, there is some hesitance with the spot price flipping around in the $70, $80 range. But people shouldn't lose sight that the fundamentals rule the day. And the fundamentals have never looked better in my 42 years. And so I think, not to get out over my skis, but between now and the end of the year, I think we're going to have a very significant rally in the spot price, probably reaching $100 a pound. And that's going to turbocharge all these uranium stocks. And the better ones that have pathway to production and cash flow like UEC, or have diversified exposure globally like URC, where we've got 25 royalties on 22 projects. But there's more. There's companies, but not a lot of companies, and that's part of the narrative. We should have a lot more miners and developers in late stages of mine development, and it's going to take a little while. So expect higher prices longer.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. If we see this, these EOs being signed and this new capital coming to the market, are we expecting a bunch of juniors to spread up, or do you think it's going to create an M&A or a consolidation?
You know what? Where Trump is really helping, we have miners and developers in the Uranium Producers of America that have permits and have infrastructure, and they're moving forward. But we have a lot of members who are in the exploration and development stage, they still have to go through the permitting and licensing phase that we went through in the past. President Trump's EOs are really speaking to them to say, are you held up by the federal government, either by action or inaction, by the EPA, Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management? Come to the White House, tell us your challenge, and we'll fix it. And literally, we're seeing EPA respond to permits that would have taken years before are now coming in months. That's going to help because that's going to feed the pipeline. If we want to, I think the existing mines in the U.S., maybe we could get to 20, 25 million pounds. But if you want to get to 30, 40 million pounds, you need to bring up, and there are a number of these juniors that are exploring throughout the Western United States. There's probably 1 billion pounds of known and likely resources in the Western United States. We've just underutilized that national resource.
It's time. All right. Well, good luck in Washington. It's always a pleasure. Scott Melbye, of course, is the Vice President, Executive Vice President of UEC, also the President of the Uranium Producers of America. I hope you give me a little, you got to WhatsApp me. You got to give me a little scoop next time.
It's going to be a good couple weeks.
Appreciate it, Scott. Thanks for your time today. I'm Jeremy Saffron. For all of us here at Kitco News, thanks for watching. We've got some great guests all week here in Boca Raton at the Rule Symposium 2025. We'll see you next time.
Kitco News special coverage of the Rule Symposium Natural Resource Investing is brought to you by G Mining Ventures.